football, the red zone is where a team has to make small adjustments to ensure victory. As you approach retirement, you also need to make small adjustments to ensure success. This is the Red Zone Retirement Program with registered investment advisor and enrolled agent John Mears of Mears Money Management.
Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. Thanks for hanging out with John and I here on Red Zone Retirement Program. Simple investing, smart future. Back into the new year with Mr. Mears and myself to talk investing, finance, and retirement. And biggest challenges to and changes to retirement, John, in 2024 is going to be our kickoff podcast this year. Another little football pun there. How you doing, my friend? You doing all right?
Really good. It's funny because I know we're recording this in early January. We're already preparing for next year. We're already trying to get our passing league teams going. Football never ends.
Crazy.
Like retirement and tax planning never ends. So
never ends.
Yeah, we had a nice little holiday season, but we're getting right after it, football and planning wise. So I'm excited to get this podcast out because there's some interesting stuff going on in 2024 as well.
Yeah, definitely. And so what we've got here, let me pull this up. We've got a little Yahoo Finance article that we'll reference. We'll put it in the show notes for folks to check out. And it's about some of the biggest challenges that could be coming up this year. And so we'll put a link into that for folks into the show notes. So, you know, if you're thinking about this, John, I mean, so right at the end of the year, right? They talked about it a couple times during their meetings, I think in like October and November. And then the Feds in December, they go and say they may cut rates in 2024, right? Which automatically sparks some interest. And the market liked that. And then we got into the first week or so of the new year and the market, well, okay, why are they thinking about cutting rates? And maybe they didn't like it. So what's your thoughts there on the cooling inflation and the stock market surge and all that good stuff?
Well, some of the stuff that we're anticipating for 2024, and we're going to talk about this on another podcast too, some of the predictions that go into 2024. But
okay.
The fact of the matter is that there's a lot of uncertainty depending on what the Fed does with interest rates. There's talk they're going to reduce them. If they reduce them, they still work hand in hand with inflation. So we still need to know what the inflation rate is going to be and what the interest rate is going to be. And if inflation remains high and inflation actually continues to go down, which it is, it's going down directionally, and the interest rates stay where they're at, the cost of borrowing actually increases because the real rate of interest is higher. So we got to keep an eye on that because the interest goes higher from a real, doesn't change from 5%, but the real rate changes because inflation goes down. In fact, it makes borrowing a more costly endeavor for businesses. And that's where we worry about the recession. So yeah,
and I know they have to be cautious with that, which is why they kind of said, well, we're going to see, right? And they said anywhere from 2 to maybe 4 cuts or something like that throughout the year. But the market got very excited at first and then went, maybe we're not so sure. So
and that's because of what I just discussed. Where if inflation, which is tapering slowly but surely, but it is tapering,
right?
And that again, the real rate is what the nerdy economists look at is what's the real cost here of borrowing. And so that's what the big companies are looking at as well. So they're looking at the real cost of borrowing.
Well, let's talk about the tax bill on Social Security benefits from last year, right? So we got that COLA last year in 2023.
And that was a big deal. It was a large increase. So we're talking about inflation. So inflation was really big, in 2022. That was all that we talked about, was how big, what the large inflation rate was. Well, Congress, allowed for a large cost of living increase for Social Security, and last year was 8.7%. So big increase. So not quite 10%, but pretty large. Well, there's a flip side to that because a lot of the people watching and listening to this podcast have taxable Social Security. So there's a possibility your tax bill will go up because you had more Social Security. So you had more income, and we always talk about this, the higher your income, possibly the higher your taxes. So if you didn't make any other adjustments to your taxes, you didn't pay additional estimated taxes or any other adjustments, it is possible that your tax bill will have gone up this year. For single people, from $25,000 to $34,000, that's where you start paying additional. Social Security can become partially taxable, up to about 50%. Then once you get over that $34,000 threshold, then it becomes 85% taxable. For marrieds, it's 32 to 44, where it starts becoming taxable. And then anything over 44,000, it's 85% taxable. It's never 100%, but 85% is a nice chunk. We can get into whether that money has been taxed in the past, whether that's double taxation. It is. But without getting into all that,
right.
The fact of the matter is your tax bill could be going up this year because you had a larger Social Security benefits in 2023.
Yeah, and the COLA for 24 is not nearly as big, obviously, for Social Security. It's a little bit smaller there, but that's a problem to deal with a little bit later on. So, those, you got to sit there and think about some of these things through there. So there was the tax conversation on that. There was just changes to the retirement account rules, which we've talked about in some prior podcasts. But it's, again, worth noting because the new year is here, because the Secure Act 2.0 changes, John, some of those were kicked in immediately, right? And then some staggered and kicked in here and now in 24, and then some kick in 25. So it's important to find out what changes have been made to retirement accounts, and how does that affect you?
Yeah, I love how Congress just staggers everything, just to make it even more confusing for the average person. So the fun one here is the Roth to the 529 plan that you can convert to a Roth. If I encounter this not a lot, but every now and again, folks that have contributed to a 529 plan for their kid, and the kid either didn't need it, they were on an athletic scholarship, whatever happened, they don't need the 529 plan. So now what do you do with that?
Well, what do you do with it? Yeah,
you can convert that to a Roth IRA. Now you're limited to a $7,000
you can now. You
conversion.
used to just have to take it out and take the penalty, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
There would be either penalty or tax of some sort. So now you can convert it to a Roth. Now you can't do all of it. Let's say there's a maximum lifetime amount of $35,000. You can't do all 35 at one time. You still have to do it at the Roth contribution rate, which is $7,000 a year. So you can do it incrementally over 5 years. But now you can start doing that. Before you couldn't do anything with it. Like you said, in the past, if you had a 529 plan, it was unused, if you will. You could take it out, but it would be taxable for the growth, and that kind of gets to be a little bit annoying for people when you really didn't need it. You had other plans for it. Congress is allowing you to reroute that. So that's a pretty handy thing. Another thing that's interesting that's coming into play this year, Roth IRAs are tax-free forever and ever, but Roth 401ks and 403bs, although they're tax-free, they did have required minimum distributions when you reach the required age, which used to be 70.5 and it's now all the way up to 75, is working our way down the road.
Right.
You used to have an RMD. Starting this year, they're saying, no, you don't have to worry about a required minimum distribution for the Roth 401k or Roth 403b. So that's pretty handy. So now you can just leave it in there, and it's treated like all other Roth accounts, which kind of makes sense because I think people were confused. Now, there were workarounds where you could move your money out of your Roth 401k into a Roth IRA and then kind of avoid that. But
right, because the normal Roth, that was you never had to deal with RMDs. You never had RMDs. It was the 401k Roth edition that was kind of a monkey in the wrench.
Yeah, it was confusing to people, and so that I think that was a good correction that Congress made in the Secure Act. So that was something that made sense. So you didn't have to go through the effort of rolling it over. You can leave it where it is, which some people want to do. It's not always wise to just leave it there, but some people want to do it for whatever reason. Congress fixed that.
Well, look at them. How about that?
We love our government.
I know, right? As I mentioned, there was a modest Social Security rate for this year. I think it's only 3.2%.
Yes.
But if you're thinking about, depending on how things go, right, it always gets taken into other things. So, one of the things that frustrates my mom about it, it's she's always joked and called it a diet cola. Anytime there's a cola, she's like, it's just a diet cola. She's like, it doesn't do it. It doesn't fill you up or anything. She's like, it's because they take it for Medicare usually, right? So
yeah, exactly.
$159 bump or something like that. They're taking like $49 of it for whatever, and $10.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not quite that severe, but your mom is not off on what she says. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Not that I'm equating Congress with the Lord. Okay, I'm not saying that.
Oh, true.
But
not in today's day and age.
No, but part of the increase, 3.2% increase in 2024. There is roughly a $10 bump up for Medicare Part B, which is the doctor visits. Part A, which is hospitalization, has never been a charge for that. But Part B, which is for doctor visits, that has been bumped up. And then and this is minimal. It really isn't a big deal, but it is part of it, is the deductible for Part B has increased. Now, where it gets people is Part D, which is for your medicines, your prescriptions, that sort of thing. that is increasing, and it varies per person. So Medicare Part D is very different, and you don't have to have Part D, but it's highly encouraged. But Part D, that's being increased by about 20%, depending on your plan, because of the larger increases in the general world with prescriptions.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, and so I think for most people, that's what they wind up worrying about, right, John? I mean, the big things that are going to tick off, and we're in election year now, so we're kicking off 2024. It's already started on every social app and on the television. I mean, I'm already seeing stuff where it's just bombarding. And so let's quickly talk about the market, and we're going to talk about some more of this stuff in more expanded detail next week, or in 2 weeks on the next podcast. But when you have an election year, that also makes things a little more interesting too, right? So people just in general get nervous when they're thinking about retirement with all this stuff going on. And then this is where a strategy really comes more important than ever, because there are a lot of moving parts, and there is possible tax hikes on the horizon if they do nothing. We've talked about that before. They're going up in 26. So there's a lot of stuff. Right now is a really serious good time to do some planning, because there's a limited window before tax rates do go up. Once the election happens, depending on what happens there, we could see some changes with the taxes. We don't know until that happens, but the window is shrinking.
Yes, it is. And really, we were saying at the end of last year, I know we said this on the podcast, we have 3 years to do planning. Now we have 2. We have 2 years to do a lot of planning before 2026. So we don't know what's going to happen, because we don't know what's going to happen in the election. And so, again, without going on to political rant, because right now, what you're saying, I've already seen this so far this year. No, you're bad. No, you're bad. No, you're bad. No, you're bad. Okay.
You're terrible.
And that's what we're getting for the next 10 months, folks, especially with the leading candidates on the other side right now. That's all they're talking about is each other instead of their policies. So we're faced with a lot of uncertainty right now. And so I do believe in my heart of hearts, when you have a plan, especially a written plan, that helps relieve some of that anxiety. So, and obviously this is a little bit self-serving, because I am a financial planner, but I do believe in that if you have any anxiety, any fears, any worries, sit down with, if not me, another competent professional, and kind of go through this. This is pretty important stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking about not pennies or dollars. We're talking about sometimes thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars that are going to be affected by what's happening in a couple of years and by the stuff that we discuss on this podcast. Yeah. So we're always trying to avoid taxes if possible. Sometimes it's okay to pay taxes now rather than later. You need to do the math. You need to sit down and plan. And there's a lot that goes into it, not just the stuff we talked about today with Social Security, but with RMDs, with required minimum distributions, future tax hikes. I can just go through a whole litany of things right now. What's going to be affected here in a couple of years?
Well, I mean, basically, it's the beginning of the year, right? So, we're taping this on January the 10th. And so, most of you probably are still, hopefully, rocking and rolling with your New Year's resolutions, for those of you that do it. And I've never been a big one to do that, John. I've never been real big on resolutions, but this year I was like, you know what? I'm in a lot of pain. I'm overweight. I got some issues, blah, blah, blah. I got to make some changes. So started this diet on the 2nd, cutting out the sugar. I don't have my beloved soda. And I've struggled, but
that's why you're grumpy when we started talking.
That's right. But I've started seeing it. I've started seeing an improvement. So I've started seeing, I've dropped like 7 or 8 pounds already. And I think the statistic is, if people who make a resolution, if you could stick with it through the 12th, I believe, of January, if you start on the new year, you're pretty heavily likely to make your resolution. But even if you're just one of those people that say, resolutions, whatever, write some things down, get some goals, put some stuff in place, get a written plan, right? Because you got to have something attainable that you can latch onto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a big believer in the roadmap thing. I really am. I'm just like, if I've got to go to name a place, if I just got to go somewhere, sure. I live in the greater LA County area, so if I need to go someplace, I kind of know where I want to go,
right?
But we got to know how to get there, and. Yeah. So there is a reason to have, and my wife always jokes about the old Thomas maps that we used to have, the big thick booklet we used to have in our cars. But
those big Rand McNally ones and stuff.
Yes, the one you fold out, you can refold. But the point is that if you don't have a roadmap to where you're going to get to, it's going to be very difficult to arrive. Not say impossible, but it's going to be very, very difficult to get to where you want to go. I always use an analogy with football. I know what I want the end game to look. I know what I want my team to look like by week 10. I know what I want them to look like. In between then, it requires a lot of constant adjusting. And what, to your point, Mark, when you have a New Year's resolution, I don't do resolutions, but I'm always trying to make myself 1% better. I know that sounds like corny coach talk.
Nope,
but
that works.
That is what you're trying to do. You're trying to make yourself each day 1% better somehow. So if that's in your financial world, your health world, relationships, whatever, you're just trying to make yourself a little bit better each day. And we're all humans, so we're going to fail a lot, but that's what we're trying to do. So if we know that there's a lot of turbulence going on in simply with a tax code alone in 2 years, it would certainly help to try and get a little bit better. You don't have to get everything done in one day, but if you kind of say, hey, this is what we need to do. The Roth conversions, we've talked about a million times. Great place to start with something like that. If you're worried about estate taxes, those are going to be affected in a couple of years, folks. Don't forget about that. And states have California doesn't have an estate tax. Oregon does. New York does. So you need to be prepared for what's going to happen with your estate taxes.
There you go.
Incremental things. Do one a quarter. That's all you got to do. You don't have to do a lot, but you've got to get working on it a little at a time.
Got to take some action for sure. Well, let me jump out. We'll take a quick break, and we'll run the thing we usually do here on the show. If you can check this out, if you'd like to get some information, John's got a couple of free books that he can give you that will certainly help with that, some of that stuff. So let's roll that. John has a couple of free books, Diffuse and Tax-Free Retirement in California, that reveal exactly how you can experience zero taxes in retirement and overcome the IRS lien on your 401k, IRA, and 403b, which could threaten your future lifestyle. These are complimentary, so all you have to do to pick these up 100% free is just stop by rescuemyretirement.net. That's rescuemyretirement.net. Fill in the basic info and he'll ship those out to you immediately. That's rescuemyretirement.net for a copy of Diffuse and Tax-Free Retirement in California. All right, we're back here, and it's time for the 2-minute warning, Coach. We'll wrap it up with an email question this week from Megan. And Megan says, my dad's in his 90s, and his health is starting to decline. Well, that's certainly understandable. Would it be wise for him to start gifting me money and my sister while he's still alive so that we don't have to deal with as much estate tax? We were just talking about that on the other half of the show. We also talked to him about possibly signing over the house to us. That's not probably a good idea, Megan. But, John, what do you think, Coach?
So I was nodding at the first part, shaking my head at the second part of her question. So yes, a gifting strategy is always a great thing to do. That's something that we need to do the math. Hopefully your dad is amenable to talking about this. If he's not, that always becomes a kind of a tough thing with parents that are older. If they have not done planning, something that's hard to get them to start planning. So that's something we're going to have to work through from a family relationship aspect here. Assuming he's willing to listen to that, though. Yes, gifting is great. Gifting is a very handy tool to use. I would sit down with a qualified professional to kind of go over what's the maximum gifting you can do, how far that's going to get you. We don't want to overgift because your dad, if he is in his 90s and he has declining health, he may need some nursing home help. So we want to make sure we have reserves set aside for that. But getting to the second part of your question, then I'm going to actually add a little addendum at the end. We do not want to sign over the house because one of the greatest tax planning tools we have out there is death. And that is if your father passes away, there's a huge step up in basis for his home. You can then sell the home for little or no gain and then be able to keep the money tax-free at that point in time. So you want to make sure that you don't do that. There are other issues that attorneys will talk about with liability, where if he adds you to the home or signs over the home, but if he just adds you to title, which is typical, and you get sued, they can kick your dad out of his house. And that's something you don't want to ever have happen. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about, there's a lot of different estate planning techniques out there, a lot. One of the things you can do is set up a irrevocable life insurance trust. That's something you can do depending on what your father's situation is. If he has a business, a family limited partnership is another technique you can use where you can start gifting or transferring some of the ownership over incrementally over time. One of the fun things is what we call a grantor retained annuity trust, which is where you can put money into a trust and then you can annuitize the money out of that. And then the proceeds actually end up going to the beneficiary at some point. So there's things you can do that can be fairly complex, That's why I had to look at my notes sometimes. But they're fairly complex, and they're things that you want to talk to a qualified professional about, because this one thing may not be right for your father. This other thing might be right for your father. There's a lot of different tools out there. So that's, again, why you want to talk to a qualified professional. And like I was saying earlier in the podcast, make sure we also know your estate law.
That would change things. Yeah. So, and there's a lot of moving parts, right? So, it's good to kind of do some general, and that's what the whole point of the podcast in general is anyway, that so many people are doing, and things that we're doing now on, social media and whatnot is hopefully giving some useful nuggets of information to say, here's some things to think about. And of course, ultimately, you still need to have that one-on-one conversation with a professional to make sure that you're doing the right thing for, your unique situation. So if you need John, reach out to him. You can find all the tools, tips, and resources at mearsmoney.com. That's mearsmoney.com. If you want to get started and just book a chat, you can go to bookachatwithjohn.net. That's bookachatwithjohn.net. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, and now YouTube. Everything's been merged, I think, over to YouTube in one. So you can find the audio version as well as the video version there, and some shorts. We have those on YouTube as well. Coach, thanks for hanging out, breaking it down.
Thank you.
I always appreciate your time, my friend. I'll see you in a couple of weeks right here on Red Zone Retirement Program, Simple Investing, Smart Future with John Mears.
Advisory services offered through Mears Money Management, Inc., an RIA registered in the states of California and Texas. California Department of Insurance License number 0685203.